recently convened a group of executives to talk about strategic alignment in their organization. And here's one thing I heard, and one thing I think that you can do about it in your own team meetings. So, one of the things I heard was that there are a lot of changes coming from the federal government if you're living in the United States, or if you're not living in the United States, you might be impacted by a lot of the changes coming out of the US federal government. And those are things that might impact your business in many, many ways that some are easy to foresee and some might be hard to foresee how it will change it. And what we talked about with the leaders is how often you bring people together, you want to focus on what your KPIs are, what your OKRs are, what are the goals that you have set. And but but once you get people into a room, everyone's spinning about these other things that are happening. And you're not sure how to reconcile staying on course with what the strategy you've set and giving space for these other things that are coming down the pike. And so I think one of the most important things to do first is to recognize that there are a lot of changes that you don't know about. But then I think to set aside some really structured brainstorming with your group in terms of how are the ways this might affect us? What are the watch signs we want to look for? What are the things that we're tracking in terms of how this change might impact us? And what are things that we can do now to prevent it having as big an impact later? So, for instance, there's a lot of talk about the US Postal Service and whether it's going to get privatized. And one thing companies can start looking at is like, what are other rates with other carriers? What is the best they could do? How could they negotiate that? And so I think it's really easy to spin about all these, what if this happens? What if that happens? But instead of letting your team spin about that, try getting them engaged in a conversation that really brainstorms, okay, worst case scenarios, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle it? What are we going to look at to figure out whether we're getting close to this worst case scenario? And that puts your team in action and problem solving mode and thinking about what's possible instead of what are all the things that could go wrong and what are the problems. So for today's learning snack, I'm Jo Ilfeld, CEO and founder of Insight to Leadership. And I want you to really think with your team how to go from problem to possibility and make sure you leave enough time in your agendas to do that.